Louis Uchitel on his book, The Disposable American. He covers economics, business, and labor for the New York Times. To read more of his work, visit the New York Times website at nytimes.com and search his name.
Civil War, Human Rights Abuses, and Economic Disparity. Men's Health contributing editor Tom Zoellner investigates the history and current impact of the diamond industry in his new book, The Heartless Stone. He spoke about it recently in New Mexico for just under an hour.
By him if you're interested encounters as well. And Tom Zoellner also wrote The Stone, which is what he's here to talk about tonight. So let's all give a hand to Tom Zoellner.
Thank you all for coming, and it's a real honor to be standing here and reading in this bookstore, which has done so much for the literary life of this great city. So thank you, Bookworks. And this is The Heartless Stone, and it's about the diamond industry. And I'm going to read to you from the first part of it, so it should be fairly self-explanatory. I think really the only necessary background for this part is that most of it takes place in a nation called the Central African Republic, which is the 10th largest diamond-producing nation in the world. And in this country, the guys that mine for the diamonds, they believe that they hear the souls of their ancestors in their dreams, telling them where to go to dig the diamonds. And when I was doing this reporting, I was taking an anti-malarial drug called mefloquine. Has anyone ever taken an anti-malarial in here? Yeah? What happened? For years and years? Okay. And what'd that feel like? I mean, oh, you're a lucky one. Let me tell you, because you had said that it's awful. Yeah. What happened to you when you were? Right. Well, one well-known side effect of this, as the label ominously says, is psychiatric side effects. And what that means is you have some of the most vivid dreams of your life, and some of the most unpleasant ones as well. And so while doing this reporting, was having some pretty strange dreams. And so with that, I'm going to start reading, and it'll take about 7 hours, so get comfortable, and breakfast will be served. But after I'm done, I'll be happy to take any and all questions, anything related to diamonds. I can talk for hours on this subject, so be careful. All right, so here we go. I've bought only one diamond in my life. It was 3 years ago in California, over an ammonia-washed glass countertop. I was planning to ask my girlfriend, Anne, to marry me, and I was full of ever-deepening love. Jacqueline, the woman behind the counter, showed me a series of stones, which she poured out of individual envelopes and set in a line. I looked at them all under a jeweler's loupe, as if I knew what I was looking at, and I listened as Jacqueline explained the relative merits of each stone. She showed me the tiny angular hearts that clustered around the bases, like the petals of a flower. There was one of them a bit clearer than all the rest, slightly over a carat, and we haggled over the price a little bit before I decided to buy it. Jacqueline put it in a Tiffany setting, and I picked it up a week later. The stone was held aloft over the band in gold supports, like a preacher in his pulpit. I admired its sparkle. Jacqueline called this the firing. I was then 2 weeks away from giving the ring to Anne on a precipice of land that overlooked the Golden Gate Bridge. And this was to be a moment I had dreamed of ever since I was old enough to understand that there was something special about girls. Where did it come from? I asked her, just to say something. I was privately marveling at writing the biggest check of my life up till that point. I don't know, she said. Is there any way to tell? I said. Not really, she said, but probably Africa. That's where they all come from. Now, the place you want to go if you really want to see how some diamonds make their way to America is a place called the Central African Republic. It is a landlocked crescent of ochre-colored earth, about the size of Texas, at the geographic heart of Africa. To fly over it overnight is to fly over a carpet of complete darkness, except for the occasional small cooking fire flickering up through the trees. There are no traffic signals, not a single mile of railroad track, and almost no electric lights in this country outside of the capital city of Bangui. The nation is so poor that the government cannot pay its own employees, and uniformed soldiers routinely beg money from passerby. Butterflies alight on the dirt roads and the broad jungle leaves, and some locals try to make extra money by ripping the colorful wings off the butterflies and gluing them to paper to make artwork. Children drunk on glue wander the filthy core of Bangui in broken flip-flops, begging for francs. Their t-shirts are often dotted with gummy clots. This is where they have smeared the glue to huff. Shoe polish is another favorite intoxicant. It is spread on bread like jelly and then eaten for a high. Still others take a stolen audio tape and soak it in a jar of water for a week. The resulting home brew brings strange hallucinations. The borders of this place have been sealed to foreigners ever since the latest in a long series of coups toppled the government in March 2003. So there's really only one legitimate way in or out. And that's the once-weekly Air France flight from Paris, which is inevitably crowded with a slice of the nation's tiny ruling class, the only ones who can afford the fare. The Sunday morning arrival of this flight is a free-for-all in the northern part of the city. Hundreds of taxi hustlers and freelance luggage porters cram close to the perimeter fence as they watch the passengers step from one world into another, out of the air-conditioned airline cabin with its foie gras and Bordeaux and copies of Paris Match, and into the fecund obscurity. And in a waiting room nearby, with thick wire mesh and tattered curtains covering the windows, are the departing passengers. They are protected like dignitaries from the masses outside, and I learned later that some of them were almost certainly carrying a highly portable fortune in the folds of their business suits and sewn into the seams of their warm-up jackets. They were able to carry the wealth that equaled the annual wages of more than 2,000 people in this country, and all without showing a bulge. And this is because the Central African Republic, corrupt, destitute, and nearly forgotten by the rest of the world, has become one of the best places on the African continent to erase the history of a dirty diamond and make it look clean. I came here because I wanted to see how it was done. Now, in this country, it turns out to be a lot easier to see a smuggled diamond than it does one that's actually been mined legitimately. And I sort of had to slip into the diamond mining regions to see what happens there. And I'm going to read to you a brief section from what I found there. Near a small village called Kate Bambale is an outcropping of black rock. It is atop a hill just north of the thin ochre track that leads to a nearby mine. That's where the spirits of the diamond are living, I was told, as we bounced along the road. We pray to it whenever we go past. There were 8 men from the village of Kate Bambale with me, packed into the back of the Land Cruiser. They were taking us deep off the road into the jungle where they hoped to find their salvation. Purple blossoms and twigs fell into our hair as the vehicle thwacked through the dense brush. The men ducked their heads. Pythons are sometimes known to fall from the trees this way. We came to a series of shallow excavations next to the Lome River. The men from the village said the first diggings had been done with a bulldozer commissioned by a diamond buyer from the town of Boda. The rest of the work they had to do themselves with nothing more than shovels and sifts. It was like panning for gold in the California gold rush, except the Americans of a century and a half ago had much better equipment. The chief of the mine, Yango Michel, was a very old man by Central African standards, at the age of 57. He stood at the bottom of a pit and he told me, "This is the exact spot where my son found a 6-carat. I was proud of him. But I would have been even prouder had it been a better color. This is how you know if you have a good diamond. If it looks like a candle, it's good. If it's colored like a beer bottle, it's bad." I asked Yango about the diamond dreams that he had. He's told me that his mostly involved chickens. The spirit comes and asks you to make a sacrifice, he said. And I often hear it in my dreams, asking me to buy a white chicken to share with the children of the village, because diamonds follow good deeds like this. The spirit then says to me in my dream, "I have heard you. I am your grandfather." And then it shows me where to go to dig to find the diamonds. He took me down to the river, and one man showed me how he sifted the ore in a wood-framed screen, looking for that magic octahedron. There's a song to the dead, a low guttural chant that is sung as they work the sifting boards. And the song goes like this. My ancestors, if you really exist, from the work that I do now, give me 5 carats, 10 carats, 20 carats. I stood at the edge of the river and looked up the cut bank at the line of men from the village of Kate Bambali. This was the bottom of a vast supply chain, a place where the birth of a diamond met the world of commerce. And between them and the end user stood a colossus, with value-adding stops in Boda, Bangui, Antwerp, Bombay, London, New York, and then on to other American cities. These men would be paid perhaps $200 for a gem that would easily retail for $40,000 in a mall in Kansas City. They were hungry and discouraged. The merchant from Boda who bought their diamonds never told them what kind of profit he made from their labor. And they suspected, quite correctly, that they were being swindled. But they were powerless to do anything about it, but keep digging and hope for a large discovery. I asked them if they knew how their diamonds would eventually be used when they left Africa, and they said no, they had no idea. In America, I told them, it is traditional for a man to give a woman a diamond when he asks her to marry him. And this set off a round of laughter. They had never heard of such a thing. It was ridiculous to them. I was asked through Alexei, my translator, if I was joking, and I assured them that I was not. The only Muslim convert in the village, a 22-year-old father of 2 named Bayo Arnaud, beamed down at me from his spot on the cut bank, and he told me, in our world, diamonds bring riches to a village. And if in America you use a diamond to buy a wife, that shows how much richer you are than us. And there was not a trace of irony or superciliousness in his tone at all. He was only meaning to express sincere, if puzzled, admiration for the special kind of dowry the West had created from the stones that their dead grandparents had shown to them in their dreams. Now, before I left the Central African Republic, I bought a few of those paper cards decorated with the wings of butterflies. They'd been arranged to make familiar shapes. A man, a hut, two birds, a tree. These cards seemed to me to be a reflection of this country as a whole. Wings torn off of a living thing to make an image of something alien, something it was never meant to be. It has a kind of beauty, but it's beauty at the expense of terrible pain. And what gives diamonds their hard and remorseless beauty, really? Whether they emerge from the death of a star or the life of plankton makes no difference. For these chips from the earth are nothing more than an empty cage for our dreams. Blank surfaces upon which the shifting desires of the heart could be written. A diamond is a philosopher's stone of the existential variety, for it is like the world itself, spoken into existence only through whatever meaning we choose to assign to it. We look into the stone and we see only ourselves firing. Anne, my lost fiancée, would come to wear it once again. Time passed and we reconciled. And we sat together at a long banquet table. There were guests on either side of us. I was holding her hand and she mine, and we chatted as though nothing had ever come between us. I could not remember being so completely at peace. Her diamond sparkled on her finger. But as we sat, I said to her, "Anne, something is bothering me. I can't remember exactly when it was that we got back together." "Neither can I," she said. "I can't remember how that happened," I said. But I decided it didn't matter. We were together again. That was all that was important. And I kept eating the hot peppers on my plate, letting the warmth of forgiveness flow over me. But the feeling did not stay. "Anne," I said, "I'm starting to wonder if you're real or not." "Please don't think about that," she said, looking at me with the green eyes that I had loved so much. "You're not real, are you?" "No," she confessed, "I'm not." I knew then that I had only a few seconds left, and I moved to hold her in my arms, to cradle what was already tattering away into methloquine wisps. And it was a sleep so deep, and a malaria dream that was so vivid, it took me at least a full minute to come completely awake and realize where I was. Alone, under the spreading veil of a crinoline mosquito net, next to the Sangha River, in Africa. That's the end of the first chapter. And thank you. And I'll take any questions about diamonds, any at all. Yes?
Tell me how it is that such a few number of corporations control the diamond industry.
Well, this goes back to 1880 South Africa, when some pipes of some of the world's best kimberlite were found. Kimberlite is the host rock of diamonds. And it took the son of an Anglican clergyman named Cecil Rhodes, who figured out the true way to really make a killing in this business. And it was Rhodes who is best known today for endowing the Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford. But his true legacy really was putting all the mining claims under the umbrella of a single large corporation, the De Beers Corporation. And the De Beers Corporation exists on a foundation of artificial scarcity. They trickle out the gems at a controlled rate, and the price is correspondingly quite high. And so, you know, as I say in the book, Rhodes' true monument is not the the Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford, nor is it you know, the nation of Rhodesia, which was named after him and is now vanished from the map. But his true legacy is the twinkling little rocks that are sold at outrageous prices underneath the glass at the jewelry stores of the Western world.
So De Beers controls all diamond production in Africa?
Not anymore. Actually, De Beers used to control up to 98% of the world's rough diamonds everywhere. And today that number is down to slightly over half. They still dominate the business, both economically and certainly culturally.
What do you expect in reference to the diamond value when the De Beers contract with Russia?
That's a very good question. I can predict that it won't go down, that's for sure. Possible. I mean, you know, De Beers lost control of its lucrative Australian contract in the mid-1990s, and this was part of the pressures on the cartel, which caused them to rethink their business model and radically shift the way that they do business. And this has all happened in recent years, and so we're in a period of real change in the diamond business. Good question. I believe that, I'm not mistaken, I'm sure that this is in the book, but I think that Russia is today the second or third largest producer of diamonds by value in the world. There's different ways to measure you know, the output of diamonds. You can either measure the number of stones, the dollar value, or the caratage. And the most conventional way is to measure dollar value. Yes?
What about synthetic stones? I understand the Russian stones are so good that you say now De Beers has to serialize their natural.
They are very good, and the process that was invented to essentially create diamonds in machines was perfected in Russia during the 1980s under the cover of the Soviet Union. The scientists out there in Siberia were growing very large diamonds out of graphite powder, and this technology is now on the market. For the reporting on this book, I actually went out to Siberia in January, actually, which was a great vacation. To see where this had happened, to see the warehouse where they were cooking up these fantastic diamonds. And you know, this technology was sold to a Florida company, among others, and they are now producing 500 carats a month in their warehouse down in Sarasota. And they are, as you say, very good quality. I mean, atom for atom, they're diamonds. These are not fakes by any means. And the quality is so good that you know, I even took it to a couple of experienced gem buyers in New York and asked them to take a look at it. And 3 out of 6 thought it was, you know, from the ground. So yeah, this certainly is a great pressure on the business.
You're not familiar with any advances in Russian technology, and have you met people who have been opinions about where Russian technology?
Yeah, I mean, part and parcel with this process of essentially microwaving diamonds into existence, if you will, is also irradiating them to improve the color of very brown and dingy stones. And I was able to get inside one of those labs in Russia. And there's a lot of trial and error involved, but if they do it right, they can turn a very brown, dingy diamond into just a beautiful red diamond that looks like a ruby. It's colored like pomegranate juice. And so this is, you know, extremely promising technology for these folks. And, you know, when I asked De Beers about this, they went into what I might call full poetry mode. Sorry? Not necessarily denial, but, you know, they really fell back on the same mythology which has kept the diamond empire alive all these years. You know, the sense that there's anything at all special about these, you know, these particular kind of rocks. You know, a diamond is really sort of quite empty without that brilliant fairy tale surrounding it.
What do you think the future of the diamond is? Especially from the technological direction.
You know, that's a hard one. I don't know that I can actually look into a crystal ball and say, you know, the price is going to continue to ascend at a controlled, robust rate, the way that it has for 118 years, or whether, you know, some of these new pressures are going to cause the price of diamonds to actually fall, or what would be even more interesting is if they were to fluctuate according to the normal cycles of supply and demand that govern every other mineral, you know, copper, cobalt, etc. There is no free market in diamonds. So the answer to your question is something that's almost impossible to guess.
I suspect that the proliferation of technology really is advancing in the fact that a lot of the people who have access to this technology are not involved in any cartel activities that they could conceivably plug in.
Conceivably. Yes. Yes. Yeah, they discovered quite large deposits elsewhere in Siberia in 1956. What color? Colorless. And De Beers immediately came in and made a deal with the Soviet Union, which was a bit clandestine, in which they agreed to buy up the Russian gems in exchange for hard currency. And most of them went directly into the vaults underneath Charterhouse Street in London, which is where their buying office is. I mean, the last thing I want to see is a stream of diamonds that is independent of their control. And certainly that was at the top of their agenda in the 1950s, is making sure that did not get released onto the marketplace.
Also, synthetic diamonds is from machining, real diamonds?
Yeah, atom for atom, they're diamonds. These machines, they look like Maytag washing machines, actually. They're quite distinctive looking. And what they do is they recreate the intense heat and pressure inside the Earth's mantle. And so you pour a scoop of graphite into it, and turn it on, and 3 days later come back. There's a perfect diamond.
No, but I meant for, I know that they use diamonds
Certainly you can, and the process was invented in 1954 by General Electric, and so there's a tremendously strong market in industrial diamonds that come from machines. Now, what the Russians did in Siberia was they improved upon and perfected this process to the point where they can actually grow gem quality diamonds. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? Yes, most of those are synthetic, I understand. Yeah, yeah, and they're called diamond bits. Yeah. One more time?
They were one of the biggest users of the natural diamonds.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, diamonds have always had, a very robust industrial use. Absolutely. Yes?
I always thought studying the diamonds helped understand how India
Yeah, that's true. 92% of the world's diamonds are now cut and polished in India. India, as everyone knows, is going through an amazing industrial revolution right now, and diamonds are a big part of that. They're now the 5th largest export product of India. And more than 1 million people are employed in this sector over there, mostly in a state called Gujarat, which is to the north of Mumbai. And one unfortunate facet of this business is that a small but significant percentage of this work, estimates are hard to come by, but my research put it at about 10% of this work is done by children. Child labor still exists over there, and children are bent to the wheel, often 12 hours a day, a dime per diamond. And this is dangerous work, which can leave them at risk for asthma and heart arrhythmia, all kinds of respiratory ailments because of the hard metal dust that's kicked up from that wheel. And labor regulation is very lax and sometimes non-existent. Yes? A very good question. During the 1990s, there were several really horrible civil wars in Africa, which were funded to a significant degree by diamonds. Diamond mines have been military targets almost as long as there have been diamond mines, and this was no exception in Africa in the 1990s. And 3 conflicts really brought this issue to the fore: in Sierra Leone, and in Angola, and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And this was one of many dirty little secrets of the diamond industry, is that these stones were being used to, on the part of both rebel groups and governments, to buy landmines and rifles and all the other armaments that were necessary to prosecute an armed conflict. And these conflicts were often very pointless. They revolved around not so much any kind of coherent political ideology, but rather almost control the diamond fields. And so the diamonds, in some ways, became the reason for the war. The term applied to these was blood diamonds, and it took a non-governmental organization based in Britain called Global Witness to point this out in 1998. And the industry, had known about this, but chose to look the other way. And when they realized, oh my gosh, we've got a big PR problem on our hands, what they did is, after some pressure from the United Nations and after great fear that their product, which depends so much on the mythology surrounding it, was going to be tainted. I mean, these are very delicate areas in the human heart that a diamond claims to lay claim to. The fragile feelings of love and commitment and marriage and so forth. And if you were to toss a bucket of blood on that, it would ruin the image. And without the image, a diamond is dead. Without that backstory, you have an essentially worthless rock. And so what they did under pressure from the United Nations and these humanitarian groups is they formed something called the Kimberley process, which is an attempt to get a hold and to get some sort of control over these blood diamonds. And I should say, in all fairness, that De Beers and the rest of the industry doesn't like blood diamonds any more than you or I do. I mean, for one thing, it really taints the image, and so it was in their interest, their enlightened self-interest, to do something. And what the Kimberley process says is that if you're exporting diamonds from any nation, whether it be in Africa or North America or South America or wherever it is, you have to export them in a tamper-proof container, and they must come accompanied by a certificate saying that these were not mined in the conflict zone. And it looks good on the surface, but what my research showed was that it's very lax. It's full of flaws. It's very easy to get around, and there's two main problems with it. And this is going to be a real challenge for the industry if they choose to address it. The first problem is it's very, very easy, particularly in Africa, to smuggle these stones out of a conflict zone and into an allegedly clean nation where they're given phony paperwork and then sent on to Antwerp or to London. African borders are often very porous. Most of these lines were drawn by the great colonial powers of the late 19th century, and they didn't really adhere to any coherent boundaries, either topographical or linguistic or anything else. And so, borders can be somewhat of an abstract construct, and therefore very easy to smuggle things across. The second main problem with the Kimberley process is it only applies to nations who are in a technical state of civil war. Those are the only nations which are banned from exporting diamonds into the pipeline. All right, now, there are low-grade conflicts going on in many African nations which are technically in a state of peace. And among them was Angola, where I went there, and the conditions that these miners face are quite horrible. Rogue bands of soldiers are in the diamond zones. There's a lot of loose armaments from the Civil War, which ended in 2002. And there are very credible reports of miners being killed for their diamonds. A popular way to smuggle a diamond out and try and get past these soldiers is to swallow it. And if you're suspected of doing this, you stand a risk of being killed and your body eviscerated as they comb through your entrails looking for this diamond. And this is, according to the Kimberley process, a diamond which is clean as a snowflake. And this is the diamond which could, easily wind up underneath the glass at a jewelry store in Albuquerque. So the industry has a long way to go towards making sure that the image of a diamond comes anywhere near to the reality of how they're sometimes mined and produced and polished. Yes?
How did it come to be that it was given for engagement?
Yeah, I mean, how did it come to be that a diamond is given for engagements? Engagement rings are a very long tradition. They date back before the birth of Christ, and they were incorporated into the Christian marriage rite. It's in the Book of Common Prayer, the Anglican Book of Common Prayer. With this ring I thee wed. It's a very old tradition in Western civilization, but a diamond is really quite new as a democratic idea in the United States. And the pivotal year was 1938. And that was the year that the De Beers cartel aimed a series of very brilliant advertisements at the American public, telling them that the diamond was what you had to have for your engagement to be real. And I went through dozens of these advertisements. in the course of this research from the 30s and the 40s. And you know, some of them are really strange. You know, like many of them harp on death as a selling point, which seems like, you know, why would you do that to sell a product? Why would you remind people of their own mortality? But they do. And the idea is, you know, reader, you are shortly going to pass from the scene, and no one's going to remember you when you're gone. And the only way to really, you know, get a piece of immortality is to buy this product from us, and you know, you can you know, pass this on to your descendants, and this is your memorial. People were also told that their marriages were going to grow cold and boring, and that their spouse would you know, perhaps not love them as they had during that early fire of youthful passion. The way to capture that was to buy a diamond, of course, and to remember that love's early fire in that stone. And, you know, this spoke to some really, you know, I think essential territory in the human heart. You know, we're all sort of encoded to look for meaning in the things that surround us and in the objects that surround us, and it's just kind of an essential part of being alive in many ways, that we seek out this iconography to express the inexpressible. You know, we look to objects to sort of clarify and marshal together our sometimes very hard to understand feelings, to make the inexpressible somehow expressible, and to pour it into like a little clean package and pay someone a lot of money for it, of course, and then hand it over, and that's that. And you know, it's that grasping for eternity that we all have. And no one's understood this better than De Beers. And it was an unmarried copywriter in 1948 that, after a decade of these advertisements broadcast at the American public, that, you know, to meet a deadline at 3 a.m., this woman, Frances Garrity, wrote down a line in haste and you know, turned it in the next day. It was taken to South Africa. De Beers saw a winner, and they immediately incorporated it into all their ads. These 4 words, which yeah, I wasn't even going to say it, but that's exactly it. A diamond is forever. You know, Advertising Age magazine called this the most successful ad slogan ever penned, and it seems to capture it all there. It's carved in glass at the front of their London headquarters. I saw it in Portuguese in Angola, their headquarters there. So. Yeah, you know, they're certainly a step up from what they were early in the 20th century, when apartheid was still in effect. You know, the really horrible conditions are actually outside of the production sphere of De Beers. You know, the really horrible conditions are out in the alluvial mines, the river mines, where these guys dig in the rivers looking for those stones which washed out of the core of ancient volcanoes. There's 2 ways to mine a diamond, really. Diamonds are pieces of pressurized carbon which were formed in the Earth's mantle and vomited up onto the surface of the Earth through this special kind of clay called kimberlite. And so there's 2 ways you get at these diamonds. You either dig down into that kimberlite, much like an open pit or a downward shaft like in a West Virginia coal mine. And this type of mining obviously requires a lot of capital and a lot of labor and a lot of heavy equipment, and it can only really be done by multinational mining companies such as De Beers and Rio Tinto and so forth. The second kind of mining is called alluvial mining, and those guys that I was talking to in the Central African Republic, from the excerpt that I read, that's what they were doing. What you do is you go down to the riverbeds, either the ghost of a dead river or one that's currently flowing, and you dig in the sands around that river, and you sift the ore, you know, much like you're panning for gold, and you're hoping to get lucky and see the wink of a diamond in that ore. And this is an enormously difficult way to make a living. You know, you're digging into very unstable sands. You know, some of these walls can be very high, and collapses are common. Most everyone working in this sector in Africa, you know, has stories of guys dying in wall collapses. If that nation happens to be restive, that diamond mine is almost certainly going to be a military target, because, you know, the armies understand that diamonds are a great way to continue to buy arms, to continue to buy these illegal armaments. And so, to answer the question, working conditions have improved, certainly, in the more conventional kind of kimberlite mining, but in the river mines, it's a really, really terrible way to make a living.
I understand that
Yeah, the question, diamonds found in Australia in the last, actually it happened in the 70s when those indicator minerals were first noticed, and then that mine went online in the 80s. And yeah, in fact, I went to that mine, and the working conditions are pretty good. Yes?
Do the diamond industry have any
Not formally. You know, I met with De Beers twice in the course of researching this book. I met with them in London and also in Johannesburg, and you know, they were guarded with what they told me, but they were unfailingly polite. You know, it was a cordial meeting, and then they asked me for a meeting after the book was published, and that too was very polite. They wanted to tell me, you know, everything that they were doing to staunch the flow of blood diamonds, which certainly, you know, that is true. They are trying to repair the image and some of the damage that the industry has suffered because of, you know, these terrible, sanguinary, amoral things that happened down the line that you know, they had no direct control over. Yeah.
What would you guess the average number of middlemen are between the guy on the desist from the alluvial riverbed and the
mall?
retailer who can't desist?
Yeah. How many middlemen are in between the mine and the mall? The average is 7, actually. It goes through an enormous layer of steps. You know, those guys in the river mine, they sell it to what's known as a collector or a regional diamond buyer, who in turn sells it to a buyer from one of the companies that does business out of Belgium. That diamond is then taken to Belgium, and perhaps it then is acquired by De Beers, perhaps not. It's then sent off to be polished, either in one of the old polishing centers of Antwerp or in Tel Aviv or in New York, but more probably it goes on to India, where it's polished there. It's then sold to another wholesaler, who then perhaps sells it to another wholesaler, who then will eventually sell it to a retailer, who then sells it to you. So at every step, value is added, certainly. And in the case of these guys, in this chapter that I read, you know, they were getting paid a tiny fraction of what that finished diamond would eventually command in the United States. So I mean, I don't know. This is an argument without really any right or wrong. You know, like my opinion is that they're getting enormously ripped off. You know, but I also understand the argument that, well, they're getting paid according to the scale of the economy of the country where they're mined. And, you know, there really are no easy answers to that question. So.
How much does it cost to polish to cut a diamond in India, as you know, compared to Antwerp or London?
Oh, it's enormously cheap. I mean, that's the reason why India is the place that it is because of the tremendous low cost that it brings to.
How much that is?
How much it is? No, I don't have any figures on. They obviously exist, but I don't know them off the top of my head.
You ever follow the money trail or the diamond trail of the blood diamonds, like Angola, for example?
In Angola, well, you know, when you say money trail, what can you narrow that question? Oh yeah. The question is the trail of blood diamonds, and you're referring to Jonas Savimbi, who was the leader of the UNITA rebel movement, and that was a rebel movement that was financed almost entirely, well, actually, largely, I should say, by illicit diamond sales. And yeah, they did quite a bit of business with arms brokers, and you know, these deals were often clandestine, often done on very rural airstrips, and you know, Savimbi used diamonds to seal friendships with other African leaders. Pardon? How am I alive? Yeah, that was a sort of a joke among my friends. You know, I was going to be a marked man, and you know, don't stand too close to this guy. But, you know, no. I mean, no one in the diamond business ever gave a hint of, you know, any kind of, you know, thuggery, or, you know, it's a very genteel business in a lot of ways. And you know, those that I approached, and you know, even when I asked very hard questions, you know, I never you know, was the target of any kind of even harsh language. So. Yeah.
Slow-acting poison.
So yeah, exactly. I'll be keeling over here any minute. Call 911. Yes.
I remember reading about Sierra Leone, the diamond funding that rebels, and somehow we were talking about a connection to Afghanistan, just convicts maybe of arms dealers and diamonds. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, you know, there is some evidence. I do not address this in the book, but there is some evidence that you know, some of Al Qaeda's finances come from some diamond sales in Africa, and that was a ball of string that I did not try to untangle. Yes, the Washington Post has done some good reporting on this.
Antwerp, you say Antwerp and New York. What was the other one? Antwerp, New York, and London. It was really dominated by Hasidic Jews, I believe, originally having I mean, in the turn of the century.
Yeah, and this, yeah, and certainly this is for very complicated historical reasons, mostly having to do with the prejudice that they often suffered in Europe. You know, they could not, in many cases, own land. They could not join trade guilds, and so diamonds were one of the only avenues of making a living that was open to them. And so it's a very, very interesting story, actually. Yeah, and I cover that in the book too.
Oh, good.
So yeah. Further questions? Boy, easy crowd here. Yeah, certainly. The question is De Beers really the main focus of its advertising efforts? And I should say that they have one of the most brilliant advertising teams you know, that has ever been assembled. And advertising is largely you know, the reason why you know, this particular stone fetches such a high price, and why there is this enormous mythology around this stone that keeps it alive, that keeps it worth much of anything, really. And so, yes, the United States has been a prime market for De Beers and the rest of the diamond industry since the 1930s. And you know, this is a $61 billion business worldwide, and the United States is responsible for about $31 billion. This is an insatiable thirst in this country, largely due to, you know, the very, very good advertising. Yes.
From a marketing standpoint, following that up, I understand the 60 couple of the games, for example, Japan,
Yeah, this is a great story here. This really illustrates not just the power of the De Beers advertising team, but also the power of advertising to create a hunger where no hunger had existed before. And it happened in Japan, which has a long, long tradition of arranged marriages and did not have a tradition at all of romantic marriage proposals. I mean, that was something you just didn't do in traditional Japan. But De Beers looked at Japan in the 1960s as they were recovering from the scars of World War II. And they saw an enormous potential market. And what they did is they broadcast a series of, again, very clever, very good ads at the Japanese, which to some degree mimicked the tremendously successful campaign that they had broadcast at the United States in the 1930s. And what these ads said were that, you know, you need to, you know, give your intended a diamond. This is the cool thing to do. This is the right thing to do. This is what you must do in some ways to make your engagement real. And you know, in 1966, the year that these ads launched, 1% of Japanese women went to the altar with a diamond. This was almost unheard of. It was just sort of, you know, diamonds were regarded as worthless in Japan. 30 years later, after this barrage of advertising, 90% of Japanese women went to the altar with a diamond. And in this shift, in this marketing coup, the entire courtship ritual had been remade. Romantic marriage proposals were becoming a cultural norm. The ancient Shinto marriage ceremony called the yuino was recalibrated, recrafted in order to accommodate the diamond as a part of the traditional gifts that the husband's family would give to the bride's family. It's an amazing story of the power of advertising. Yes? That's a very, very hot subject of debate, actually. How many diamonds still lay underneath the Earth's surface? And you'll get differing answers depending on who you ask. The hunt for diamonds is still very, very robust and passionate, and it extends in Canada, which is now the nation's fourth largest diamond producer by value. it extends further and further north towards the North Pole every year. One of the most incredible things that I saw in connection with reporting this book was an exploratory rig on a place that was 500 miles north of the Arctic Circle. And this hunt keeps going and going and going, and they are giving enormous amounts of effort and resources to try to find new deposits. And so really it's anyone's guess as to how many of these little chips of pressurized carbon are still out there waiting to empty the wallets of the public. No question there? Okay. Yes? That has been their business practice. That had been their business practice for nearly 110 years. Whenever a new deposit of diamonds was discovered, De Beers would immediately come in and try and partner up with the finder and take control of that find, and then either not develop it at all, or develop it in a way that the stones went to their selling office where they were sat upon. Absolutely. One more question, and then we'll call it quits.
I guess I have a question on the cost effectiveness and the profit of the diamonds that are created in the pressurized chambers. They are selling for the same amount?
No, actually, they're selling for a quarter of the price of a mined diamond. And this is obviously a tremendous challenge to the industry. How do you combat this? How do you combat this threat of infinite supply when artificial scarcity has been the controlling principle of the trade for so many years? And so and I said earlier when I asked De Beers about this, they reverted into poetry, and in some senses it was entirely predictable because poetry is all that really keeps the diamond from being a worthless little pebble. And so actually what he said was remarkable. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read it aloud. I'm going to read to you the response from one of De Beers' executives when I asked him about how they were going to deal with this challenge. So bear with me a second here. And okay, here we go. I'll just read you these two paragraphs here, just so you have the context of what he said. Ask anyone in the conventional diamond industry about synthetic stones, and you're likely to get a response laden with poetry. The exquisite mystery and purity of natural diamonds will be extolled to the heavens. You'll hear phrases like the depths of the earth, the hammer stroke of nature, or millions of years. After hearing this speech dozens of times, quite often as a rebuttal to synthetic diamonds, I came to think of it as the diamond song. It was only a slightly more anxious version of the same myth that De Beers and the rest of the industry had been spinning around their product for more than 100 years. This is, after all, no ordinary rock. Otherwise, there would be no money in it. I heard a very good version of the diamond song from Andy Bone, the head of external relations for the De Beers Group in London. When I asked him about the potential threat from Gemesis, that's the Florida company that's making these diamonds, the potential threat from Gemesis and unknown others in China or Russia, he gave me this response. We don't really see that synthetics and diamonds are the same product. You've got this whole mysterious creation process. Nature created a diamond. Except for the polishing, nothing has been done to it by man. We don't smelt them. All we do is recover them. They are made of the same thing we are, carbon. And when you give one to a woman, it's a symbolic exchange of a commitment. You have to remember, a diamond is much more than the physical thing. The physical intercourse between men and women is something without words. And that's what a diamond conveys, something without words. Now, take a diamond created by this mysterious process of nature and put it next to one created by a lab in Florida 6 months ago. Which one of these are you going to choose to carry your message? That diamond created in the laboratory has lost the mystery. Close quote. He went on to tell me that De Beers had discussed launching an ad campaign with the tagline, "Real men with real emotions use real diamonds." The upshot being that any other kind of love expressed with a lab diamond was equally as sterile. Or in other words, diamonds needed the wild and turbulent fires of the mantle to express the wild and turbulent urges of our subconscious. Never mind, of course, that almost every metamorphic rock on the surface of the planet was created by the hammerstroke of nature in the bowels of the earth millions of years ago, etc., etc. That the mysterious process involved in the production of natural diamonds might also involve civil wars, murder, starvation wages, child labor, and price fixing was also left unmentioned. Yet, when faced with the threat of infinite supply, this is where the De Beers cartel and the rest of the industry are choosing to make their symbolic stand, on top of a mine shaft. So this really is a sort of a battle of dueling narratives in a way. You know, can the makers of these synthetic stones create a kind of a narrative, a story, you know, if you will, a fairy tale that's powerful enough to trump, you know, this image of a diamond, which has been carefully cultivated by De Beers and the rest of the industry. And this is one of the things that's really going to determine where this business goes in the next decade. Okay, one last question.
So, are you buying diamonds?
Am I buying diamonds? No, I don't think I could ever do it again. Yeah. Which, you know, that's not to say that you know, I want to stand up here on some sort of a moral high horse saying that I think people are bad people for liking diamonds. You know, I understand the appeal very, very well, and it took me a very long period of time, almost 4 years, before I was finally able to let go of that ring left over from my broken engagement. And so, you know, they really do. You know, there's just something inside of us, that really fragile, you know, mysterious territory in the heart that really does reach out for that inanimate object in which to express those feelings. And so the diamond has come to really occupy that real estate.
It's interesting that, just a side note of how the whole...
Still others take a stolen audio tape and soak it in a jar of water for a week. The resulting home brew brings strange hallucinations. The borders of this place have been sealed to foreigners ever since the latest in a long series of coups toppled the government in March 2003. So there's really only one legitimate way in or out. And that's the once weekly Air France flight from Paris, which is inevitably crowded with a slice of the nation's tiny ruling class, the only ones who can afford the fare. The Sunday morning arrival of this flight is a free-for-all in the northern part of the city. Hundreds of taxi hustlers and freelance luggage porters cram close to the perimeter fence as they watch the passengers step from one world into another, out of the air-conditioned airline cabin with its foie gras and Bordeaux and copies of Paris Match, and into the fecund obscurity. And in a waiting room nearby, with thick wire mesh and tattered curtains covering the windows, are the departing passengers. They are protected like dignitaries from the masses outside. And I learned later that some of them were almost certainly carrying a highly portable fortune in the folds of their business suits and sewn into the seams of their warm-up jackets. They were able to carry the wealth that equaled the annual wages of more than 2,000 people in this country, and all without showing a bulge. And this is because the Central African Republic, corrupt, destitute, and nearly forgotten by the rest of the world, has become one of the best places on the African continent to erase the history of a dirty diamond and make it look clean. I came here because I wanted to see how it was done. Now in this country, it turns out to be a lot easier to see a smuggled diamond than it does one that's actually been mined legitimately. And I sort of had to slip into the diamond mining regions to see what happens there. And I'm going to read to you a brief section from what I found there. Near a small village called Kate Bambale is an outcropping of black rock It is atop a hill just north of the thin ochre track that leads to a nearby mine. That's where the spirits of the diamond are living, I was told, as we bounced along the road. We pray to it whenever we go past. There were 8 men from the village of Kate Bombali with me, packed into the back of the Land Cruiser. They were taking us deep off the road into the jungle where they hoped to find their salvation. Purple blossoms and twigs fell into our hair as the vehicle thwacked through the dense brush. The men ducked their heads. Pythons are sometimes known to fall from the trees this way. We came to a series of shallow excavations next to the Lome River. The men from the village said the first diggings had been done with a bulldozer commissioned by a diamond buyer from the town of Boda. The rest of the work they had to do themselves with nothing more than shovels and sifts. It was like panning for gold in the California gold rush, except the Americans of a century and a half ago had much better equipment. The chief of the mine, Yango Michel, was a very old man by Central African standards, at the age of 57. He stood at the bottom of a pit and he told me, "This is the exact spot where my son found a 6-carat. I was proud of him. But I would have been even prouder had it been a better color. This is how you know if you have a good diamond. If it looks like a candle, it's good. If it's colored like a beer bottle, it's bad." I asked Yango about the diamond dreams that he had, and he told me that his mostly involved chickens. The spirit comes.
Louis Uchitel on his book, The Disposable American. He covers economics, business, and labor for the New York Times. To read more of his work, visit the New York Times website at nytimes.com and search his name.
Civil war, human rights abuses, and economic disparity. Men's Health contributing editor Tom Zoellner investigates the history and current impact of the diamond industry in his new book, The Heartless Stone. He spoke about it recently in New Mexico for just under an hour.
And tonight we have Tom Zoellner. He has worked as a contributing editor to Men's Health magazine, and he's also worked as a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. He is the co-author of the book An Ordinary Man, and called the man who inspired the film who had by him if you're interested in encounters as well. And Tom Zoellner also wrote The Stone, which is what he's here to talk about tonight. So let's all give a hand to Tom Zoellner.
Thank you all for coming. And it's a real honor to be standing here and reading in this bookstore, which has done so much for the literary life of this great city. So thank you, Bookworks. And this is The Heartless Stone, and it's about the diamond industry. And I'm going to read to you from the first part of it, so it should be fairly self-explanatory. I think really the only necessary background for this part is that most of it takes place in a nation called the Central African Republic, which is the 10th largest diamond-producing nation in the world. And in this country, the guys that mine for the diamonds, they believe that they hear the souls of their ancestors in their dreams, telling them where to go to dig the diamonds. And when I was doing this reporting, I was taking an anti-malarial drug called mefloquine. Has anyone ever taken an anti-malarial in here? Yeah? What happened? For years and years? Okay. And what'd that feel like? I mean, oh, you're a lucky one. Let me tell you, because you had said that it's awful. Yeah. What happened to you when you were? Right, right. Well, one well-known side effect of this, as the label ominously says, is psychiatric side effects. And what that means is you have some of the most vivid dreams of your life and some of the most unpleasant ones as well. And so while doing this reporting, was having some pretty strange dreams. And so with that, I'm going to start reading. And it'll take about 7 hours. So get comfortable, and breakfast will be served. But after I'm done, I'll be happy to take any and all questions, anything related to diamonds. I can talk for hours on this subject, so be careful. All right, so here we go. I've bought only one diamond in my life. It was 3 years ago in California, over an ammonia-washed glass countertop. I was planning to ask my girlfriend, Anne, to marry me, and I was full of ever-deepening love. Jacqueline, the woman behind the counter, showed me a series of stones, which she poured out of individual envelopes and set in a line. I looked at them all under a jeweler's loupe, as if I knew what I was looking at, and I listened as Jacqueline explained the relative merits of each stone. She showed me the tiny angular hearts that clustered around the bases, like the petals of a flower. There was one of them a bit clearer than all the rest, slightly over a carat, and we haggled over the price a little bit before I decided to buy it. Jacqueline put it in a Tiffany setting, and I picked it up a week later. The stone was held aloft over the band in gold supports, like a preacher in his pulpit. I admired its sparkle. Jacqueline called this the firing. I was then 2 weeks away from giving the ring to Anne on a precipice of land that overlooked the Golden Gate Bridge. This was to be a moment I had dreamed of ever since I was old enough to understand that there was something special about girls. Where did it come from? I asked her, just to say something. I was privately marveling at writing the biggest check of my life up till that point. I don't know, she said. Is there any way to tell? I said. Not really, she said, but probably Africa. That's where they all come from. Now, the place you want to go if you really want to see how some diamonds make their way to America is a place called the Central African Republic. It is a landlocked crescent of ochre-colored earth, about the size of Texas, at the geographic heart of Africa. To fly over it overnight is to fly over a carpet of complete darkness, except for the occasional small cooking fire flickering up through the trees. There are no traffic signals, not a single mile of railroad track, and almost no electric lights in this country outside of the capital city of Bangui. The nation is so poor that the government cannot pay its own employees, and uniformed soldiers routinely beg money from passerby. Butterflies alight on the dirt roads and the broad jungle leaves, and some locals try to make extra money by ripping the colorful wings off the butterflies and gluing them to paper to make artwork. Children drunk on glue wander the filthy core of Bangui in broken flip-flops, begging for francs. Their t-shirts are often dotted with gummy clots. This is where they have smeared the glue to huff. Shoe polish is another favorite intoxicant. It is spread on bread like jelly and then eaten for a high.